While soldiers were dying on the battlefields, the king of the most powerful country in Europe was locked away in his bedroom, sewing clothes for dolls. This is not an exaggeration. It is not satire. It really happened. The story you're about to hear sounds far too absurd to be true, but every detail is documented. This is the story of a man born to rule an empire, yet completely incapable of facing the reality of power. A king who preferred imaginary worlds to real decisions. A man who chose needle and thread while his country was bleeding. And the most disturbing part of all, no one could stop him. Today, we're diving into the life of Peter III of Russia, one of the most bizarre and reality-detached monarchs ever to sit on a throne. And yes, he truly did sew clothes for dolls while Russia was at war. And if true stories like this make you feel as uncomfortable as they are fascinating, then this channel is exactly for you. Peter III was born in 1728 in Germany, under the name Karl Peter Ulrich. He did not grow up in Russia. He didn't speak Russian. He didn't understand Russian culture. His mother, the daughter of Peter the Great, died when he was very young. His father died soon after. From childhood, Peter grew up isolated, emotionally neglected, and surrounded by rigid, unaffectionate tutors. From an early age, something about him seemed stuck. Peter grew physically, but emotionally he remained trapped in childhood. At just 14 years old, his aunt, Empress Elizabeth of Russia, brought him to St. Petersburg. She needed an heir. On paper, Peter was perfect. Royal blood, a direct descendant of Peter the Great. But it took only a few months for everyone to realize that something was deeply wrong. Peter despised everything Russian. The language, the religion, the customs. He refused to integrate. What he loved, almost obsessively, was Prussia, a country that was, ironically, Russia's enemy. While Russia was fighting Prussia in the 7 Years' War, Peter spent hours admiring portraits of the Prussian king, Frederick II. He collected Prussian uniforms, forced his servants to march like Prussian soldiers, reenacted imaginary battles in his bedroom. To him, war was a game, a spectacle, not a reality filled with real deaths. Things worsened when Elizabeth forced Peter to marry a young German princess named Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst. History would remember her by another name, Catherine the Great. The marriage was an absolute disaster. Peter ignored Catherine, humiliated her, and treated her with contempt. While she studied politics, learned Russian fluently, and carefully observed how power truly worked, Peter remained locked inside his fantasy world. He built toy battlefields on the bed, gave voices to his tin soldiers, simulated executions, punishments, strategies, all in miniature. War only made sense to him when there were no consequences. In one infamous episode, Catherine entered the room and found Peter staging the execution of a dead rat on a tiny wooden gallows. The animal had chewed one of his toys. Peter calmly explained that the rat had been tried by a military court and sentenced to death for treason. This was the man who would inherit the Russian throne. In 1762, Empress Elizabeth died, and Peter III became Tsar of Russia. Many hoped that the weight of the crown would change him. That responsibility would awaken something that had never appeared before. It didn't. One of his first decisions as Tsar was to end the war with Prussia, and not just end it, abandon it. Russia was winning. Berlin had been occupied. Victory was within reach. Peter returned all conquered territories, asked for peace without demanding anything in return. He threw away years of war and thousands of lives simply to please his hero, Frederick II. For Russian generals, it was humiliating. For soldiers, it was a betrayal. For the people, an insult. Peter didn't care. He was content. Back at the palace, he remained surrounded by toys, miniature uniforms, and military fantasies. He began forcing real soldiers to take part in his games, dressed them in clothes he sewed himself, invented absurd ceremonies, played the violin terribly, and demanded absolute silence while he performed. Meanwhile, Catherine watched. She saw an empire being ridiculed, a throne occupied by a man incapable of understanding the gravity of his decisions, a ruler who confused power with play. Peter also began attacking the Russian Orthodox Church, mocked rituals, ridiculed priests, tried to impose German Protestant customs on a deeply religious nation. Every decision isolated him further. 6 months. Peter III ruled Russia for only 6 months. In July 1762, Catherine acted, with the support of the military, the church, and the elite. She declared herself empress. The regiments swore loyalty to her. The people celebrated. When Peter learned of the coup, he panicked. He cried. He begged. He had no plan. All his strategic brilliance existed only in fantasy. He tried to flee. He was rejected, abandoned, alone. Peter signed his abdication and was taken to an estate called Rupture. Days later, he died. Officially, of hemorrhagic colic. Unofficially, almost everyone believes he was murdered. Catherine denied involvement for the rest of her life. But with Peter dead, there was no longer any threat to her power. Peter III entered history not as a cruel tyrant or a misunderstood genius, but as a childish man placed in a role that demanded absolute maturity, a man incapable of dealing with the real world. His story is a warning, not about evil, but about immaturity in power. Because when someone living in fantasy controls real decisions, it's real people who pay the price. Peter loved war as long as it was a toy. He loved strategy as long as it had no consequences. He loved command as long as it was a game. When reality arrived, it destroyed him. And that is why he is remembered to this day as the Tsar who sewed clothes for dolls.